Hi, and welcome to the NPC Sports Podcast. My name is Ben. I'm joined as always by Logan and Dakota. How are you guys doing this morning?
Spectacular. How are you, Ben?
Just as spectacular.
I'm doing very well too.
All right.
I had a nice little I took a trip yesterday to the Cape. Little played hooky, took a little mental health day, if you will, and went to the Cape. Thought it would be a funny exercise to go to the beach when it was wind chill factor 5 degrees, and immediately regretted it. It was the coldest I've ever been on a beach. Had a really bad time, but good memories.
I can tell by your T-shirt you're in beach mode. Hang ten.
I'm trying to be. I'm trying to be.
All right, we got a lot to get into today. Even though this is considered kind of an empty spot on the sports calendar, there's a lot going on. I think right off the top, let's talk about the Red Sox because they had, they could have nice things for maybe 48 hours. Had the news come in that they had signed Alex Bregman to fill out their infield, fill out their lineup, and then just like that, Rafael Devers had to go and poop all over it, saying that he does not want to move off of third base. When asked if he would rule out a trade, he would not say he would rule out a trade. On top of that, I've been digging into a lot of the numbers as it goes to Rafi Devers, and we've always known that he's a terrible third baseman. I have
Jacked.
always thought he's a bad third baseman, but with the little kind of research I've been doing the last couple of days, he's jaw droppingly bad.
Mm-mm.
Which okay, we got some disagreement here. All right, let's get into
Yeah,
it.
I
How
also kind of disagree with that
okay,
characterization.
okay. How what is your overall take on the Rafael Devers situation before we get into his defensive inability?
Yeah, I would just say, I think, there are a lot of nuances in this thing, and I would say I have a different view of how Rafi Devers is handling it than I do how Tristan Cassis is handling it. I think those are two different things. With Devers, it's tough, right? I think, and I might be giving him too much credit here, but I do think sometimes with players like him, some of this stuff gets a little lost in translation. Like when you're dealing with a guy who English isn't his first language and it's going through a translator, I think things like the nope, no, it can come off more blunt than it was intended. I'm not saying that's what happened. I just always sort of leave open the possibility for that's what's happening, where it just sounds worse to our English speaking selves than it does to someone who's going through a translator. That maybe he really wasn't that dismissive and blunt, in his mind. What you have an objection?
I'll give you that. However, I perceive it the other way because translators are usually, I think actually always, team employees. So
Sugarcoat
whenever
it.
I do hear a quote that comes through a translator, I assume that there is a little bit of whitewashing that's going on with what they're
Agreed.
saying. Um,
Yeah.
so, in my mind, when I heard the translator say what they said, I honestly thought, wow, if the translated version is this kind of plain, I can only imagine what the actual thing that was said was. Sorry, go ahead, Logan.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's fair. I think that's fair.
Yeah, I mean, I I think that I agree with Ben in terms of like where the translation probably played. Like, if anything, that watered it down. I'll say, like, is it the worst thing that he thinks he's a third baseman? Like, you paid the guy a massive deal that is commensurate with what a premier third baseman would get. So I'd be more concerned if he was like, yeah, I'll go to first, like, very willingly. And he's also like, his development at third base has been a very big thing over the last few years, especially like earlier on in his career, but to this day. And I do get the sense that it's something that he's taken a lot of pride in. It's gotten considerably better than it was when he broke into the big leagues. But it's like, I don't know. Bregman still might be a better fit at third base, and that doesn't mean that Devers is wrong for saying I'm a third baseman. Like, I'm more interested to see what the fallout is if they actually pull the trigger on moving Bregman to third. Like, that's when Devers' response actually matters.
Yeah, and I think part of it is he was in a lose-lose situation with that line of questioning, which is kind of what you alluded to. Like, if he says that he's willing to go to DH at first, people would call him lazy, and if he did what he ultimately did, which is saying no, I'm not moving off third, he's a jerk. And so, not to mention, I don't know who the reporter was, but somebody asked him about his weight, which was a little wild. But it seems like
That's pertinent to the conversation, though, isn't it?
it is. I don't know.
That has been part of it. That has been part of it.
Yeah, to Logan's point about all the work he's done. I think that there would be my opinion on his positional situation would be far different if he came into camp in the best shape of his life, saying, listen, this is the second year of me supposedly being the leader of this ball club, and I am going to commit myself to my health and which impacts my play on the field. And
yeah, but I don't know how often he's come. I think there was that one.
He
season
never
a couple
comes
years
in
ago.
shape. Never.
I ultimately just think that sometimes what happens in Boston, and it's especially happened a lot since Belichick left, is like I think the media is trying to hold a lot of players and coaches to this potentially like unrealistic middle ground standard where you don't want Belichick, who was insane, who was closed off and disingenuous to an extreme, and you don't want total transparency because it's viewed as not good for the team, and creating media firestorm. So you ultimately want everyone to find some sort of middle ground. And yeah, like in my head, I think that's probably not that hard to find. It's just some version of like, hey, I view myself as a third baseman. I've always played it. I pride myself in getting better, but I'll do what the team wants me to do. That's probably all you have to say. But like some guys just maybe aren't as good at finding that middle ground. Maybe the media coaching with the Red Sox isn't great. I think it very clearly isn't great if we're being honest. So I don't know. Maybe I'm giving the guys too much credit, but I try and give them some slack because I just think we pick them apart to such a degree, and we expect them to reach this ideal middle ground that I'm just not sure is realistic for most players.
Yeah, I mean, no answer is going to be completely satisfactory for everyone, but like, I don't know. I almost feel like a hardo because I've got very few issues with what he's said so far. Like, he should believe he's a third baseman. He was signed to be a third baseman. The one, I guess, like caveat I will allow is the notion that, well, he got paid already, so he should be more willing to do what's best for the team. And I would be curious, maybe he did get asked this, and I probably should have dug in on it more, but I wonder if anyone asked Casas how he would feel about being a DH. Because he got the line of questioning about like, what do you think about being, the Devers third baseman thing or whatever. And it sounded like he was being kind of like smug or sly or something like that. But my follow-up question would have been, what if they ask you to be the DH? Because you want to talk about defensive liabilities. Like, it's not like Casas is like any huge asset over at first base. So if playing the field is so important for Devers, and I can sooner see a world where Tristan Casas becomes like the JD Martinez type, where he just wants to fixate on hitting. And then you move Devers to first and you go from there, and maybe that kind of smooths everything over. I would be curious about that, but that's the one thing I'll allow for, is that Devers theoretically could be at a position in his career where he should just care about winning. Like, no matter what, he's getting paid. So I do understand the frustration from some fans that are like, just do what's best for the team. But from a pure competitiveness standpoint, it makes plenty of sense to me that he's like, I was brought up as a third baseman. I've been the third baseman here for 7 years, 8 years now. Like, that it should be his job to lose, and he should feel that way.
I also think what we don't know too is, and I wish this would have been asked too, is what were the conversations like when you did your negotiations with the Red Sox before your contract? I'm sure this came up, and was it like they said you're our third baseman, like permanently for as long as you want to be? Is it, hey, are you open to changing positions after a few years or somewhere down the road? Like, what?
Cora already threw cold water on that.
Yeah.
Cora says like the people who signed him were the last front office.
Right.
He said Himes in St. Louis. So like, I think they know that that's totally out the window. Any assurances he was given, except for maybe from John Henry, but I don't think John Henry would be saying you're going to be the third baseman forever. That doesn't seem like his deal.
So then it becomes like, so how does that, if you're Devers, if you signed a huge contract, and it's easy for us to be like, dude, you're making 300 something million, just let it go. But if he signed the contract partly with the understanding like, hey, you guys are going to give me run to play third base, I can understand the frustration. It doesn't mean you should draw a line and be like, I'm not moving, but I get the frustration. I also think, it's easy for people to point toward, Bregman's comments, but team first comments, or someone like Altuve willingly moving to the outfield. But those guys are very different stages of their career. They're in their 30s. Like, I just don't, those are apples to oranges to me. So I don't know.
Yeah, for me, it's not. My thing about the infield alignment is much less so March 30th, 2025, or whatever day the season begins, because I actually think that it's better to be stronger up the middle, at second base and shortstop with Story and Bregman, and to be serviceable at first base than it is to have a sterling defensive third baseman right now. The reason that I think that this is a bad stance for Devers to be starting with is in 2026 there's a possibility that your best infield is Bregman at third, Story at short, or maybe even Mayer at short towards the end of the year, Campbell at second, or Mayer at second, and somebody else at first base. So, and then Devers obviously at DH. So that to me is the kind of the issue, is that it's looking forward to hopefully when they're going to actually be good and those runs that he gives up really matter. I'm with you. Like I watch almost every Red Sox game, and I was with you, I should say, about a week ago, where I was like, yeah, I mean, he's bad, but he's not historically bad. And then I started looking at it and I was like, oh my God, he is historically bad. He's been the worst third baseman, not only over the stretch of his last, I think, like 6 years defensively, but like each of those 6 years, he's also almost perennially led the league in, or led the league? No, not like, but been last in the league in runs saved at third base. And then beyond that, you just have just the embarrassing plays that he has had. Like, he hasn't just had like, these are some tough plays. Like, he's had like routine ground ball, he fields it, he fires it into the stands. I mean, I'll never forget, I think it was 2021, routine ground ball to third. He goes, he boots it. Well, he's trying to go get the ball he booted. He runs into the runner going second to third base, so he interferes with them, and then he doesn't get to the booted ball in time to stop that runner from scoring. And I was like, holy macaroni. Like,
yeah, I see. So
the floor is low. The floor is really low with him.
Yeah, for me, it's tough because I think there are a few things here. Number one, I think it's undeniable. I don't know, maybe not necessarily in the stats, but eye test alone, he's definitely gotten better on defense since he came into the league. Like, I think,
he can make some incredible plays for an objectively bad defensive player. He makes fantastic plays.
Well,
sometimes.
but there's like a Pablo Sandoval element there, where like even where they look spectacular, because he's like flailing to his right and then coming up and making amazing, and you're like, well, wait a second, like, if that was Alex Bregman, he would have just taken 2 steps to his right and picked it up and thrown it to first base.
Yeah, but so I think his numbers are definitely skewed. Like, he makes a lot of great plays and high-end plays throughout the season, and then he botches these routine plays that skew the numbers. And I also think a big element of this is he hasn't had any consistency at shortstop. So, I mean, I think Devers' biggest issue, and the majority of his errors and his problems are ranged to his left. And I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but someone did share them with me recently, where his numbers with Story at short versus his numbers without Story at short are stark. There's a massive difference. So I just think I'm allowing for the possibility that with a full season of Trevor Story, obviously not a guarantee, that we'll get a much more consistent and reliable Rafael Devers. And the final variable, I think, these guys aren't robots. And some guys don't handle full-time DHing well. I mean, Yoshida's numbers on offense when he starts as a DH versus when he plays in the outfield are also stark. And some guys just need to play defense to get into the flow of it. So you just kind of get into weighing the pros and cons. Like, do we tell him to pound sand and deal with it? What does that do to his offensive numbers? So I don't think it's as black and white as, shut up and go DH. So that's why I'm just like, I want to see it for a little while. If by the middle of the season, it's like, no, our best team is you rotating DH first with Cassis and Bregman at third and Campbell at second, then you got to tell him like tough. But in the meantime, I'm willing to see how it looks.
They should be able to play Bregman at second and third. Like, I know you probably shouldn't be paying a utility guy $40 million a year, but like, because they do have Yoshida, Casas, and Devers who could all DH, and that's assuming Yoshida doesn't get traded. But it's like, you should be able to cycle Devers through as a DH every now and again and put Bregman at third. Because assuming one of Romy Gonzalez or David Hamilton makes the roster as a spare infielder, like, there's your backup second baseman.
Rafaela too.
And Rafaela too can obviously play there, right?
There's also DH opportunities for Bregman since he's right-handed.
Right. So one just random hypothetical that I just thought of, but say the Red Sox either don't have Devers or Devers was more amenable to moving positions. Do you think Bregman's here on a long-term deal? Like, I wonder if the year-by-year thing is because of the uncertainty about where to put him. Like, for this year, you can figure it out. Maybe he opts out, something like that. Like, you can tolerate this for a couple years, but I just had the thought, like, they've known for a while that this was going to be Devers' response. So I wonder if they knew that was their only path, and that kind of prevented them from doing something longer term with them.
I think it's more about the proximity of Meyer and Campbell, where like there's a non-zero chance that as soon as by the end of the season, both of those guys are, at least from an offensive standpoint, more impactful than Alex Bregman. Then you don't want to hitch your wagons to a guy for 5 more years. Maybe a little bit of both. I also think it's interesting that like the three players sort of caught in the middle of all of this are Cassis, Devers, and Vladdy Jr. to a degree, and all three of those guys are like they came up playing third. They probably can play first. They're probably DHs. It's like, well, in the like if the Red Sox go sign Vladdy Jr. next year and somehow don't trade Tristan Cassis, are we going to have like some rotation with the three of them playing first and DH? Maybe someone going to third in a pinch. It just doesn't seem sustainable. Like something's got to give there. It's probably Cassis, but.
No, I like.
So
the
what
Casas
would be your
DH idea? That has not been floated a lot, but yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Logan.
Well, I was gonna say, so I'm curious, everyone, who would be your ideal trade candidate between Devers, Casas, and Yoshida in terms of people who would reasonably get moved, like balancing the return you would get versus the immediate drop off to this year's team?
I mean, I wouldn't include Yoshida in that. I think they would like to attach Yoshida into any deal involving those guys, but I think after what happened with David Price and Mookie Betts, they should think long and hard about doing that again and willingly lessening the return, which is what happened with the Mookie Betts deal. Like, you don't want to attach Yoshida to Devers and then have to accept a trio of like, prospects that rank between like 8 and 10 in someone else's organization. Like, you need to get an absolute stud. So, but that's tough. I think, ask me in a year, because, there's a non-zero chance that Cassis has the season that I think a lot of people believe he's capable of, which is like 275, 35 homers. And if that happens, then you could certainly get a lot for him, maybe even more than Devers, depending on if there's another season of Devers getting banged up, playing bad defense at third. Because at that point, they're both first basemen. And I think so I don't know. It's a good one. I would probably.
That's a thinker, isn't it?
A lot of this is colored by the fact that, according to some reports, they tried to trade Casas with Yoshida attached, and they couldn't do it. So if that is to be believed, then that kind of makes this an academic argument.
Personally, those are also two depressed assets.
Yeah. So personally, I mean, I've said it before. I love Casas's ceiling. I just don't know that he's ever going to be able to stay healthy. And I do think that there's a possibility that you could trade him as a younger asset for something more. That being said, supposedly there was a deal that had him for Luis Castillo in some way, shape, or form that didn't happen. So if that didn't happen, maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe he's not an asset that you can trade to get a top flight talent in return.
I think it's
I don't know if he
inevitable that
is
gets
right
moved.
now.
Yeah, I think with the Red Sox, like give it a year with Cassis, maybe to the deadline. Then then everyone has a better idea of what his value is, and you can do a trade that makes more sense. And just the more I've thought about it, I think it's inevitable that he gets moved, just because they want to sign Campbell and Anthony especially to these extensions to buy out their arbitration years, like they did with Rafael and Bayo. Maybe Meyer is ultimately trade bait, but they want to sign those guys. They might have to sign Duran. They want to sign Vladdy. Someone, same math they ran into back in the late 2010s when you're like, there's not room for Bogarts, Betts, and Chris Sale in all of this. And ultimately, they chose Chris Sale, right? And, so they're going to have to make one of those calls again. And it feels to me like Cassis would be the one squeezed out, both in terms of the other options you have, the headache, and the return you can get for him.
Well, I've said repeatedly that, like, first basemen are a dime a dozen. And I think that's why power hitting first baseman that is. And that's why I think it was tough to move Costas this offseason, is because you haven't really seen the next generation Freddie Freeman we were told he was going to be. And so why would you trade a very
It's almost like the Garrett
using
Crochet of first baseman.
right? It's like, why
you're
would
paying for what you're pretty sure he's going to be, but you don't really have much evidence to support it outside of short bursts.
Exactly. So it's like he probably needs more than a month-long period of being red hot. And if I'm the Mariners, for example, I'm not trading Luis Castillo when there is a distinct possibility this guy becomes Ty France, who they just DFA'd after signing to a longer-term deal, I think. So, there's a lot of room for things to go wrong, or for him to just be like a mid-tier, Garrett Cooper type. So, I do think that that's probably why he was borderline untradeable this offseason, is it's like there's a lot of room for things to go wrong with him where I wouldn't give a massive haul for him yet.
Hey, Logan, off topic, can I just ask you, is that a Milwaukee power drill bag up behind you on the stairs?
It's not a Milwaukee power drill bag. It's a Work Pro one. I think the drill is a Black & Decker too. So no Milwaukee here.
You watching YouTube tutorials on how to use that thing? Because I know you don't know how to.
Whoa. This house has been thoroughly baby proofed. So
Okay.
I have used an electric screwdriver before. Thank you.
Mr. Connecticut over here.
I'm a Ryobi and rigid guy myself, but we can put that on off for a future pod. All right, we'll have a lot of time, a lot of space to talk about the Red Sox this summer. Now I kind of want to switch gears to the Patriots. A lot happened with the Patriots that we haven't really had a chance to touch on yet because of all the other craziness that's been going on. But Mike Vrabel is obviously in. He's been formulating his coaching staff. There's been a lot of hemming and hawing about the feeling on that coaching staff. I will just say off the top to set the stage for you guys, after the OJ Mayo. Oh, that's a blast from the past. Gerard Mayo.
Wow.
OJ Mayo. Oh. Memphis Grizzlies great OJ Mayo, and even the last few years of Brian Belichick. Let's see how I can screw up that name. I'm glad that there's going to be competence. I'm big on competence. It's when it comes to professional coaches. I am a big believer that players on the field, maybe less so in football than in the other three big sports, but I really believe that the players on the field are the ones that determine how high and how far you go. And I just want someone who can go in there and knows how to fill out a lineup card, knows when to throw the red flag, and above all, I know that there's been a lot of saying, oh well, there's retreads. We got Doug Marrone, we got Josh McDaniels, and I've been really encouraged because I'm like, at the very least, we got people who know how to be National Football League coaches, And for that alone, I'm very high on what he's done with his coaching staff. But I'm interested to hear what you guys think.
Yeah, real quick, you mentioning OJ Mayo that made me. I realized the other day that Jeff Green still is playing. Did you know that?
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
Jeff Green will be playing long after the three of us have left this earth.
yeah, he's played in 16 games for the Rockets this year. He's averaging 5 points.
He's a much more useful player at this stage in his career than he ever was at his peak. He's a very, 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 very useful player. Like he's big, he can shoot.
Jeff Green was a nice player.
He was, yeah.
Yeah, he's one of those things where it's like if you go back now and were to redraft that 2007 draft, when you factor in like overall usefulness and just like longevity, I think Jeff Green was worthy of the 5th overall pick.
But it took him a while to get
Was
here.
that like the LaMarcus Aldridge draft?
We're so off topic. Yeah, it was. That was Greg Oden, Durant, Al Horford, Mike Conley, Jeff Green, then Eugene Leon. I don't know why I threw that X.
Yeah.
Corey Brewer, Brandon Wright,
he was
Joakim
Chinese,
Noah.
not like whatever that was.
I said it like with you know, AC Miles
like
in there.
Colombia, like
Marco Bell. Yeah, I mean Jared Dudley was in there. There weren't many.
No, go on. Say Marco Bellinelli again.
Rodney Stuckey was in there. Yeah, Wilson Chandler, Rudy Fernandez, Aaron Brooks.
Rodney Stuckey. I'm a big Rodney Stuckey guy.
Yeah, Gabe Pruitt, Nick Fazekas. Well, I'm almost at the bottom of the draft. I'll finish this out. Torian Green. That was in the second round. Yeah, so I think you can make an argument that Jeff Green was in fact worthy of the 5th pick. Anyway, on the Patriots coaching staff, yeah,
What role is Jeff Green playing on the Patriots coaching staff?
I straight up forgot where we were. Like it's just, when you're like the Patriots coaching staff, it's like that is what we were talking about. Huh?
Yeah, I think to me, like 2 big takeaways are a ton of experience, which was not the case the last few years. I mean, especially last season, outside of a couple coaches, but you know, ever since Josh McDaniels left, a lot of the coaches that Bill Belichick had as assistants were inexperienced, and so it's good to have coaches that know what they're doing. A lot of experience. It's a smaller staff, which is interesting. Belichick always went with smaller staffs. Gerard Mayo was on the extreme end, was the biggest staff I think we've probably ever seen in New England. Mike Vrabel pared that down, is kind of in the middle a little bit. A lot of blending of schemes, especially with, the guys that, Mike Vrabel is used to, and Josh McDaniels, who's more of a West Coast offense. A lot of the guys with Vrabel are, a bit more of outside zone and some of these other things. But so it'll be interesting to see how that all works out. But I don't, ultimately there are a lot of unknowns here that are interesting. Like Todd Downing as the wide receivers coach, that's a hugely important role, and we just have no idea how he's going to do. But there, I think the other thing, and there's just a lot of, big personalities in here. I mean, you got a lot of head coaching experience. You have Mike Vrabel, obviously. Josh McDaniels has been a head coach. Thomas Brown, who's the tight ends pass game coordinator, was just an interim head coach for a little while. Doug Marrone, running the offensive line, has had coaching experience. So, a lot of big personalities. You have Ben McAdoo, who has had coaching experience, moving from offense into more of a defensive assistant role. So there's just a lot of blending of styles and experience, where, I can see how maybe some of that becomes a problem if things don't go well early on. But overall, I think it's a good staff, certainly better than they've had in recent seasons. But I think the big ones to keep an eye on are offensive line and wide receivers, because those have been the big issues the last few years, and they have to hit those hires.
Yeah, that's why I like the Doug Marrone hire. Like I thought he was a decent head coach. I mean, he definitely brought a lot out of some Jaguars teams that, ultimately had a lot of talent. Like you look at the one that went to the conference championship game against the Patriots, like they had some stars, but that was also a team that he did a good job of developing. And so, I appreciate that they're putting the experience there. The offensive line has been an atrocity the last few years, so that was an area where they really couldn't mess around. I also like the Thomas Brown hire. I will say, as part of my job, I actually listen to a lot of Chicago sports talk radio and have listened to a lot of their players talk about Thomas Brown and how much they liked him. So that seems like someone who, like, when they replaced Matt Eberflus in Chicago and they had Thomas Brown, like DJ Moore, players like that were like, this is a very good personality fit. Like this is a very good whatever. So I think he could sort of fill the role that Gerard Mayo in some ways was like wrongly trying to fill while also being the head coach. Like you want like the young, relatable guy who's like a very ingrained part of the coaching staff. Like I know he's gonna be what, tight ends and passing game coordinator, but like I don't know. I can see Thomas Brown being a useful voice. And I just like that they by and large just sort of nuked Mayo's coaching staff and started clean. I thought there was a little bit of trying to like let me rephrase. I think it would have been a huge mistake to try and balance guys who they thought did well last year with like whoever Vrabel wanted to bring in. I think one of the holdovers is Jeremy Springer, who I actually like and thought that like, you know, he at least seemed to have the right attitude and would say the right things, even though the special teams weren't without their flaws this year. So, you know, it's tough in February to really wrap your arms around what a coaching staff's going to be able to do because we don't know how it's all going to be schemed out and who the more prominent voices are going to be. But like, on paper, I'm happy with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. No, I was going to say my one final note that I was going to add is I think it's interesting that on the one hand, there still is like this clinging is the wrong word, but we'll say clinging on to the Belichick, the dynasty years with Vrabel and McDaniels. But on the other hand, it was a total eradication of everything that was left over from that, including sort of these nostalgic grabs with, Dante Hightower being the linebackers coach, Troy Brown being receivers coach or returners coach, Matthew Slater serving in sort of an all-encompassing role last year. I mean, Slater's gone. Dante Hightower wasn't brought back. And Troy Brown, I mean, I don't know if you saw, but I think he was hired on the minority coaching fellowship with the Giants, which good for him, but that's a incredible demotion for someone that spent 3 seasons as the primary receivers coach under Belichick, and now he's, a very low-level assistant with the Giants. But again, I just think it's interesting that you have some prominent figures from the Patriots dynasty, but otherwise it's a total clean slate.
I want to be like one of the few people who I'm thrilled with the McDaniels edition. Most people who are on board with it are kind of like, yeah, okay, fine. I'm a gigantic Josh McDaniels fan, particularly for this position. You mentioned, he's more of a West Coast style guy. I actually think he runs almost every version of modern offense.
He blends a lot for sure.
Very, very well. Like he doesn't, he's maybe, he's not, again, you got the Ben Johnsons and all those kind of guys. And those guys are obviously, they run the highest level cutting edge type of offense imaginable. But like for McDaniels, I've just seen a guy who is so he's so versatile. And he can make adjustments, not just like in games. I mean, we're coming off a Super Bowl where maybe the best offensive coach of all time couldn't make any adjustments in game. And McDaniels has always made in-game adjustments when he was with Belichick, but also like over a longer course. He's had different levels of talent of quarterback, different strengths at running back, wide receiver, and I think whenever he's been given any semblance of talent, which I don't think he really was, at least a quarterback in Denver, he's been able to come up with something that's effective, and I think that's especially important for Drake May, because we don't know what type of offense really suits Drake May the best in the NFL right now. We know what he did in college. We know what he did this year where there wasn't really a system. But that's why I really like the McDaniels hire, because I feel like he's going to come in and he doesn't have his offense that he's going to teach to Drake May. Like he's going to come in and, maybe this offense works better. Maybe parts of this or that offense works better for May. And I think McDaniels is unique among modern coordinators where like he has enough of that, contemporary experience and skill with that, I don't know, not personal humility, but like professional humility, where I feel like he is willing to say, okay, you know what, this might not be my thing, but I'll adjust this because it's best for my second year quarterback.
Yeah, and all
Yeah,
indications are that he spent like the last year and a half spending a ton of time around a lot of different collegiate programs and studying a lot of things to add to his offense and modernize it a bit. So I'm with you. I mean, I do think versatility, continuity are two big things that he brings. You don't have to worry about him bolting for a head coaching role anytime soon. Um, I'm with you. I had really no issues with the McDaniel's hire. People try to poke holes in it, but I thought it made perfect sense.
yeah, I've kind of been decidedly anti-retread, but like he does make practical sense. I mean, look no further than the fact that than like he had 1 year with Mac Jones, and Mac Jones looked pretty good, and then he left, and Mac Jones cratered, and like you can look at that one of two ways. You could say like, well, maybe he got so much out of Mac Jones that he created something that wasn't sustainable, which again would be an endorsement of Josh McDaniels, because then you would think, well, if you give him Drake May, who's more talented, then that would presumably work out better. Um, or you could say that, like, well, it really matters who the offensive coordinator is as it relates to the young quarterback, because they gave him Joe Judge and Matt Patricia the next year, and it, railroaded his career. So he has a demonstrated body of work in terms of developing young quarterbacks. And so you really can't knock it. It makes practical sense for what they're trying to do.
Yeah, definitely. All right. I'm going to try to keep us on track. I know Logan's got baby related deadline coming up. Four Nations face off. All right. So if eggs weren't so expensive, I would have brought props and we could all put egg on
Thoughts,
our face.
Dakota?
About how I'll just say I was wrong. I won't lump you all in with me. But the Four Nations face-off has been a runaway success, not only in the quality of the product, but in the performance of the product. People watching hockey. I don't know. What's your guys' mea culpas or takeaways from the 4NFO?
Well, I probably shouldn't be proud of this, but I don't think I was. I mean, I wasn't the biggest fan of in-season tournaments, but I don't think I was railroading the concept that much, because I like the international portion of it. I was just like, I don't know if people are going to give a shit about this. So I am both right and wrong, because I was playing both sides of the fence. So that's my mea culpa, is not having a more pronounced take, I guess. But yeah, I think it was all predicated on how seriously the players were going to take it, and the players all seem to take it pretty seriously. So it's been a good product. I think if the players half-assed it, the fans would have half-assed it, and you would have seen that in the quarterfinals or whatever the opening rounds were. And the ultimate championship, which is going to be what tomorrow would have reflected that. But like, it's probably going to be a madhouse tomorrow, and it rightfully should be, because the players are taking it seriously.
Yeah, I was wrong about it, and I just definitely think I have a lot. I grew up with a ton of hockey friends, like mostly surrounded by hockey people, and I always sort of experience this. Like, hockey players have this inferiority complex where they always want to dog on basketball and dog on the NBA because hockey isn't as popular. And I don't necessarily disagree with them. I'm probably I lean more hockey, even though I played basketball. Um, but I've always just said, like, there's nothing that's ever going to close that gap. Like, basketball is just too more globally relevant. Um, but things like last week with how bad the NBA All-Star product was, and I mean just probably the worst it's ever been. And on the other end, how good of a product the Four Nations thing was. That was a needle move in the direction for hockey that I think if you start stacking those up, and maybe that gap does close after a while, because at the end of the day, say what we want about how sports are so corporatized and the business of it and all these things and different ways you could just sort of manipulate fans and suck all the money out of them. Ultimately, like, people want to watch sports that that they want to that they think are worth investing in, where the players try, they actually give a damn and put in real effort. And I just think more and more people might start to go away from basketball if the product stays the way it has been. And I think any sort of average person, if you watch those two things, you would say hockey has more redeeming qualities than what we were watching from the NBA. So I just thought it was an interesting sort of again, like a needle move in the direction of hockey. That, maybe it's a sign of things to come.
Well, at the risk of being a little hyperbolic, like, have we really seen a change to a league or a change to a conventional approach to things make such a massive difference in terms of like how engaged the fans are in any sport compared to this? Like, think about the NBA in season tournament, the changes they've made to the All-Star game. Baseball, they've expanded the playoffs, they've tweaked things that way. The pitch clock, things like that. There have been all sorts of these changes and tweaks and whatnot that have been going. The kickoff rule in the NFL, and for the most part, they're met with a good amount of trepidation by fans, resistance. It takes a very long time for them to warm up, but like, this seemed to really engage people right away. Like, there is legitimate buzz and juice for the championship. And maybe it's a little bit different if the championship is USA versus Finland, not USA Canada, which is kind of a good rivalry. But even still, like, that is ultimately a good thing. Like, they position themselves to where there is a marquee matchup, and there was always a path for there to be this marquee matchup. So just kind of racking off the top of my head, it's like you really do have to commend the NHL, because leagues we're certainly in an age post-COVID where leagues are trying all sorts of things because they learned that they need to be able to adapt. And a lot of it is either falling flat or neutral. But this is like a legitimate boon for the NHL, which is not something I feel like we see like a lot. Feel like something we see a lot these days.
Yeah. Dakota, I'm glad you brought up the NBA, because my dominant take was going to be crossing sports, and I was worried that it was going to seem like it came out of left field. So I don't know if you guys know, one of my bits is that Victor Wembanyama stinks, and he doesn't. I'm aware that he doesn't, but I do hope that Victor Wembanyama fans were watching these games.
Oh my God!
Because so Wemby was billed when he came in as I've done this before. I've looked it up. I'm not going to look up, but two quotes I recall was one, he's the single greatest professional prospect in sports history. That was one quote that was offered. Okay. Ludicrous. The other was he is Hakeem Olajuwon, LeBron James, and Magic Johnson all looped into one. That was the second one. So with that level of hype, for me, there's no way he's not a bust. The only way that he fulfills that hype is he's got to win minimum of 5 championships, 6, 7 MVPs. Like he has to be the greatest professional athlete since Babe Ruth.
He has to have like a decade-long run.
It needs to be out of this world. And so the reason that this kind of circles back to hockey is Connor McDavid is he's the greatest hockey player I've ever seen in my life. And that's coming on the heels of two other very big hyped players in Sidney Crosby and Alexander Ovechkin, who both lived up to their hype. And then obviously I didn't see, when Gretzky came in, but I obviously saw Gretzky. So, but like to see McDavid, like that goal that he scored where he made every other player on the ice look like a junior player, and he put, Charlie McAvoy, who we can debate the merits of him as a top level defenseman all we want. But he just made him look like a tree trunk. To me, it was just one of those like, wow, I hope all these people on the NBA side where hype is all they got basically nowadays, we're watching another sport and being like, oh crap, like this other sport, like they also have their amazing studs, and their studs are more studly than our studs.
When I watched,
I'll just say quickly, I've never seen an athlete in person I was more impressed watching than McDavid. Like, of every game I've ever watched, I've never seen an athlete who, watching them in person as opposed to on TV, I was like, holy smokes, like watching them in person does not truly do it justice to the level of McDavid. Like, the speed alone is insane how quickly he gets up and down the ice.
Yeah, when I watched that goal the other night, I went to thinking about how back before I moved down to Boston, despite growing up around hockey. I didn't play hockey. Like I said, I played basketball, so I'm not like good at hockey, or like, I'm not a great skater at all. But I started playing men's league, and it was just mostly a beer league. But at one point, um, this one guy started playing with us who played Division One at UVM, and he obviously wasn't trying that hard against us, but he just skated differently than we did. He wasn't putting all his effort into skating. It was like two pumps and just gliding around the ice so fast. I'd never seen anybody skate that fast without trying. Like, I'm like, I can't imagine going that fast on skates. And then I think about that McDavid goal, and I'm like, he's going like 15 times as fast.
Yeah, it's right.
Like,
Like even when he's coming up again, like McAvoy does not have skating speed really, in my opinion. But he was still like McDavid's coming up, and you're like, okay, I know he's an NHL player, but like I know how fast that this usually goes, and then you're like, oh my god, like he is.
yeah, like I just can't imagine an
different
ice
level.
level watching
Yeah.
somebody go that quick. Like it'll be interesting to see if Connor Bedard, because I mean, we talk about the hyped prospects. He was hyped just as much probably as Connor McDavid, and it hasn't panned out quite yet, at least in terms of the two-way game. But he's so young. But you just wonder, will he eventually round into that? Will he start to be as impressive as McDavid is?
Bingo.
Before we move on, more nuggets from the 2007 NBA draft. uh, Glenn Davis with a 35th overall pick to the Celtics.
It's a good pick.
Was an interesting one, but I'm curious. There were 3 players taken in that draft who averaged over 14 points a game for their careers. One was Kevin Durant, who's at 27.3. The other was Mike Conley, who was the 4th pick, who averaged 14.2. The other was a player taken with a 48th pick. I'm just wondering do you know who that is? And he was drafted by the Los Angeles Lakers technically, but ultimately played for the Memphis Grizzlies.
Marquise Daniels.
Not Zach Randolph, right?
Nope. Big man. Marc Gasol.
Not still,
I was gonna say
Marc
it.
Gasol. I was
You're
gonna say
too
not
quick.
still playing, right?
Dang it.
Yeah, Marc Gasol with
It
the
was
48th
on
pick.
a
So I guess the
dime,
question
damn
is, who is the 3rd best player? If we Durant is the best player taken in that draft, who's the 2nd and 3rd best? If we include Al
Probably
Horford,
Marc Gasol.
Yeah, I'd take Gasol
Yeah.
over Conley. Yeah.
you take him over Al Horford.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, Horford's got a lot of longevity on his side, but Gasol was the best player on multiple Western Conference championships team. I mean, Western Conference Finals teams, right? Right.
You take him over Aaron Aflalo. There's some good players.
Close, but yes.
Yeah, I would lean Gasol over Horford too, but I just thought that was an interesting one, like between those two. One guy taking 48th, the other guy taking 3rd. But anyway.
Once again, you've backed us into a corner where there's no segue to the next topic.
The hard pivot. The hard pivot.
But for Behind the Keyboard, today I wanted to talk about, I don't know, what do we want to talk about? Oh yeah, with spring training opening. I know that none of us have ever covered baseball full time, but we've dabbled here and there. So I wanted to open it up and see what good stories you all had from whether it's baseball coverage, inside a clubhouse, anything tangentially related to the greater world of Major League Baseball that sticks out to you.
So the best story that I have to offer, this is also the closest I've ever been to covering baseball full time, was in 2016 when this was going into my senior year of college. I interned for WEEI under Rob Bradford, basically just going to Fenway every day and working under him. So one day we're in the clubhouse, and this is okay. So 2016, I'm not sure if this name will mean anything to you guys, but do you remember Michael Martinez? The Red.
I remember. I remember. The more obscure a Red Sox player is, the more likely I am to remember them.
Yeah, he was just a ton of fun. He was a waiver ad in like May, and I think he didn't even last the season. The fun fact is he ended up being the final out of the World Series that year. He went back to Cleveland, and he was the last out of the season, but he did have like a 4-month run with the Red Sox. If I remember correctly, he was a second baseman. He was like an infielder or something like that. But the Red Sox, out of nowhere, were like, we need a right fielder, so Michael Martinez is going to play right field one day. And it was this very windy day, and he was just like a disaster out in right field. So the next day, we're standing in the clubhouse, and this is like the number one lesson that I got from Rob Bradford that I always remember is he'd always get so pissed when people would just stand around in the clubhouse. He'd be like, if you're not going to get in here and do something, just get out. Don't like crowd around the clubhouse, like go in there with a purpose. So I'm standing in there with him, and he's going on this diatribe about standing around in the clubhouse. And he's like looking around, and he goes, there's Michael Martinez over there. He goes, why don't you go over there and ask Michael Martinez about the first time he ever played the outfield and see what he says. So I was like, all right, sure. And I was 21, I think. I was still pretty young at the time. And I walk over and I'm like, hey, Michael, do you have a second? And he just goes, I don't speak English. And so I go back to Rob and I'm like, he just told me he doesn't speak English. So he goes, well, let's find the translator. So I go and I'm looking around for the translator, and they're like, oh, the translator's off today. And so it was just like, all right, the translator's off. I was like, I'm shit out of luck. And so there's like
that's when you got to get out
moment.
your Spanish English dictionary and you got to go up.
Well, so I've always built myself as semi-fluent in Spanish because I took 5 years growing up, and the last 2 years the classes were taught entirely in Spanish. Like I understood and could speak and read and write in Spanish, and at 21 I was only like 3 years removed from that. So I'm sitting there thinking, like, is this my moment to try a bilingual interview? And I was like, absolutely not. So Brad Foe's intention was in the right place, but I ultimately just got shut down very quickly by Michael Martinez.
That's pretty good. I also built myself up as a fluent French speaker, but I actually don't have any idea what I'm doing. I don't have any in-person Red Sox reporting experience, which is a bummer, because during my 8+ year, maybe 7 or 8+ year stint at NESN, when it was abundantly clear that my preference was for baseball, my manager at the time, Ben, just never sent me to a Red Sox game, which, I harbor some resentment over that. But
I knew this was going to come up. You bitched about that all the time when we were at NESN.
Did we ever really cover Red Sox then, though? I feel
there was also this carrot dangled in front of me one time that we were going to send me and someone else to Fenway when the Angels and Ohtani were going to be in town. And then the game got rained out or something, and it just
Ohtani was hurt. That's what it was. I remember we were going to be there for every Ohtani game, and then Ben scrapped the plans because he either wasn't playing or he was hurt or something like that. He's like, we're not going to cover a June series against the Angels if Ohtani's not playing.
Yeah, so people don't forget. But anyway, but
Tyler Ward is, or whoever would have been the main thing is,
Ty Buttry, maybe. I think Ty Buttry was the closer at the time.
Who was the outfielder? Cole Calhoun. He would have been there then. Right?
Oh yeah,
he killed the Red Sox too.
He would hit moonshots for the Red Sox, and then he'd get DFA'd the next week. It's like, oh, I guess this guy actually sucks.
Yeah. Anyway, I have 2 experiences covering things on site at Fenway. One was the Harvard. Was it Harvard Yale? Either way, Harvard was playing. It must have been Harvard Yale, and it was at Fenway. That was cool. But the one that I remember most is before I started working at NESN, when I was working at the Globe as just a correspondent, mostly doing high school sports. Occasionally, I would go do big events like the Winter Classic at Gillette, and then I also did this event at Fenway called Big Air Fenway, and they put a huge ski and snowboard ramp in the middle of the field. I mean, this thing was up like higher than the Green Monster by a good amount. And yeah, these guys would just go down it, do huge jumps or whatever. And but it was just interesting going to it and seeing the entire park completely taken over by ski and snowboard bros. And the media that came and covered it was just a completely different crowd than what you're used to going to Boston sports events, where it was just a bunch of crunchy riders and snowboard and ski people. I remember overhearing one group complaining about the granola that was on offer in the media room at Fenway. But yeah, it was just a bizarre event seeing that happen at Fenway Park and just seeing the crowd, the kind of reporters that were working there. At the end, I got to take like the stairs all the way up to the top of the ramp. And again, like you got to imagine that you're in the middle of Fenway Park, and I'm a good easily like 50 to 60 feet, maybe more above the Green Monster. So it's kind of a surreal experience.
That is cool. I do remember that.
Yeah.
So I actually have I have a few. I think the two that I'll share. One I will name names because it reflects well on said player. The other one I will not name names or even what team or stadium I was at when it happened because it would not reflect well on said player. So I guess I'll start with the bad one. I will never forget. I was in the clubhouse before a game, and there was some sort of charity thing that was going on, and a group of the players were supposed to go and meet with like some, sick kid or something. And one player, he was not a star, but he was very, very annoyed by his need to engage with a less fortunate child. He was just very, oh, we gotta go meet with a damn sick kid. Like what the hell? Like it was to the point I was like, wow, you might be the worst person I've like ever been around, because like that's like all they had to do was like go and take a picture, and I guarantee this wasn't a player that this kid would have known anyway. So I was like, wow, you're a terrible human being, and this will always color my opinion of you, because I always thought he was a decent player, but then after that I just did not want to see him do well. And he ended up getting cut, so that's good. But the other story that's kind of a good thing is so when I was first starting out, I covered high school sports in South Jersey in the Philly area, but there were occasionally times where it's the summer, there's not a lot of high school sports going on in the summer, and a lot of times like the full-time beat writers go on vacations and stuff, so occasionally I would have to go, just a handful of times I had to cover Phillies games, because the beat writer who was in our chain would be on vacation or whatever. So I'll never forget. It was a Phillies. I think it was the Brewers. And so I had to file something before the game. So I went to the Phillies clubhouse. There was the starting pitcher, for the next day's game was talking, but there like really was not a lot going on. And this was like a national chain. So I was like, okay, I'll go into the visitors clubhouse and see if there's anything there that I can get just to like file as the pregame notebook item. And there was like nothing in there, but never forget the one guy who was in there. And I tried talking to, a couple people, and they were like, nah, I don't have anything, man. But Milton Bradley was sitting at his locker. And I was like, he was having a pretty good season at that point. So I asked, I was like, hey, Milton, I was like, do you have a couple minutes? He was like, yeah, sure, man. And he took the chair of like the player whose thing was, and he like cleaned it off, and he like tossed their thing like into their thing, and rolled it up. He's like, sit down. So I can't remember what it was, but he talked to him for like a good 5-10 minutes, and he was engaging. He was great. And then he went out that night and got ejected because he's Milton Bradley. But but I always remember that because Milton Bradley, one of the most famous hotheads in the history of professional sports. The one time I met him, he was the most pleasant, nicest guy in the world, and he gave me something to file there before the game.
Thank you, Milton Bradley. Nice player, very nice player.
Oh, he was a great player. If he could have stayed on the field and not getting thrown out every week.
If he wasn't trying to tune up fans.
Yeah, in a future episode, we should maybe do best and worst players to interact with throughout our reporting days.
Yeah, that would be good. That's a good one. For this week, though, I think let's cut it there. Logan, Dakota.
Wait. Oh, hold on. No, I think we have one more thing to get to, and I just want to bring this up because this is part of this podcast is talking about news and news coverage. And I just need to say that I think significantly more media coverage needs to be paid to the fact that there is now a 3.1% chance that this asteroid is going to hit Earth in 2032. That is up from 2.3% a couple weeks ago. Do you have any idea, translated to 1 in X chances, what 3.1% is?
Yeah, 3
That
in
is a
10.
pretty
It's
substantial
3 in
jump,
100.
but
3 in 100. That's what 3%
One,
means.
no, that's 1 in 32% chance that this thing hits Earth. I'm just saying, it's only the size of it is a football field, which is like a city killer. But I'm just saying, can you imagine if this thing was like planet killing potential and it was 1 in 32% chance?
well, I know you've got 9 hours of video games ahead of you, but maybe you can dig into that a little bit today.
I'm just saying, nobody's
Yeah.
talking about it, but 1 in 32. Those are outrageously high chances of a football-sized asteroid hitting Earth.
So we will see, because that will be toward the end of President Musk's first term. So we'll see if all of this investment that we've made into the SpaceX programs and all that actually is going to bear some fruit, or if it was just more government waste at the hands of that fraud.
That's definitely the part where we should cut this off.
All right. I've been Ben for Logan and Dakota. Thank you very much for joining us. The NPC Sports Podcast. Have a great one, everybody.